On January 14th, IRCC announced some big changes to spousal work permits. Elizabeth, could you take us through some of the recent changes?
Absolutely. For international workers, on January 21st, that's when these changes are going to be taking place. Spouses of those where your occupations are tier 0 and 1, you're okay. Spouses of those where you have a job of tier 2 and 3, it will depend on the occupation. What are these occupations? We don't know. That list will be published on January 21st. And for spouses of tiers 4 and 5, forget about it. You're not going to get those work permits. Spouses of those who have work permits under the free trade agreements, exceptions are for you. Whether or not it's for everyone who has free trade agreement work permit remains to be seen, but so far that's what they've announced. Finally, those of you who are transitioning to permanent residence, we believe that might be for those who have work permits that are bridging work permits. You are also okay.
Another important requirement is that there has to be 16 months on the work permit for your spouse. So the principal applicant needs to have at least 16 months left on their work permit when you submit the application for your spousal work permit.
That's absolutely right. So if your work permit, you only get a 1-year work permit, then it doesn't even matter what occupation you have, you're not going to be able to get the spousal work permit. Again, free trade agreement and bridging work permit holders seem to be exempt from those requirements. Mary, can you tell us about students and spouses of students?
Absolutely. So the rules have said that spouses of international students will only be eligible for a work permit if their spouse is taking a master's program that's at least 16 months in duration, or a doctoral program, or a selected professional program, which is on the IRCC website. They've posted a list of those selected professional programs. So if your spouse is not in one of those programs, you don't qualify for an open spousal work permit.
On to extensions, which are even more complex. What are they saying about the extensions for people who already have a spousal work permit and their spouse is a student and the student is extending their study permit?
So if you're a spouse of a student and your spouse is extending their studies and they need to get more time to complete their studies, then you are allowed to apply for an extension to the same duration as your spouse's study permit. So you can apply to extend your existing spousal work permit only to the same duration as your spouse's study permit. And how does that work for workers?
If you currently have a spousal work permit and you want to extend your spousal work permit, maybe because the principal applicant who has the main work permit is longer than yours, maybe because your passport expired, that's okay. You can extend it to the end of that period. Whether or not you can apply to extend your work permit when your spouse renews their work permit, that is still up in the air. We're not exactly sure because these are just announcements. They're not the actual provisions. And so you may be able to extend it if your spouse extends their work permit, or it may depend on the new criteria for that. So many things up in the air. Mary, what would you suggest that people do at this point?
If you are in a situation where you're going to be impacted by these changes and you're eligible to apply for a work permit extension as a spouse, while they haven't exactly said what's going to happen with these rules, we're hoping that if you apply before the changes come in, they'll process you under the old rules instead of under the new rules. So that's why many people are going to be applying for their spousal work permit extensions or spousal work permits in the next coming days before the change comes into place on the 21st.
Right. We are not exactly sure that the government wouldn't retroactively apply the new rules to those people who have submitted their application and still waiting. Fingers crossed they don't, and if you submit it now before 21st, you might be okay under the old rules. The other thing is, if people are able to obtain their spousal work permits maybe at the border. Now, flagpoling is also now extremely limited, but sometimes if you were to not flagpole and you're still able to obtain it at the border, then that might be an option as well before Jan 21st.
What would you suggest people do if they're going to be impacted by these changes and they're not going to be applying in the next couple days? How should they adjust their plans?
If you have a spouse who needs to continue to work, there are other kinds of work permits that may apply, and we can certainly look at these options for you. And finally, what we didn't mention is that dependent children's work permits are now also going to be canceled by January 21st as well. These are just things that we understand may happen just from the brief announcement by the government. We'll know more certainly after January 21st as to what the actual provisions are. Take care, guys.
Best of luck, everyone.